From the Hairenik Media Studios, good evening. June 27, 2025 will be remembered as a day of national disgrace and outrage, when the Armenian state turned its force not on foreign enemies, but on the Armenian Apostolic Church, the spiritual heart of the world's first Christian nation. Armed forces stormed Holy Etchmiadzin, detaining Archbishop Ajapahyan on charges widely condemned as fabricated. Just days earlier, Archbishop Karapetyan, leader of the Tavush for the Homeland movement, was arrested under similar accusations of terrorism and plotting a coup. Following his return from Istanbul, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan launched a preemptive crackdown on national groups and institutions that could oppose this agenda. What began as political unrest has become a sweeping purge. Clergy, opposition leaders, and citizens are being silenced. Church bells now ring not in celebration, but in defiance, as Armenia stands at a historic crossroads. Political prisoner Archbishop Ajapahyan, who is under a 2-month pre-trial detention order, has been transferred to the Yerevan National Security Service Detention Center. He now joins other political prisoners, including businessman and philanthropist Samvel Karapetyan and Archbishop Ajapahyan, who were previously transferred to the same facility. The Supreme Spiritual Council has condemned the regime's actions, calling this a coordinated campaign to dismantle the church from within. Critics say Prime Minister has crossed into authoritarian rule, using state institutions to suppress faith and freedom. Following Pashinyan's visit to Turkey, concerns have grown over a policy of appeasement toward Ankara and Baku. Reports suggest Turkey is demanding Armenia meet Azerbaijani conditions for normalization, including suppressing Armenian nationalism, enabling the return of Azerbaijanis to Armenia, and opening the Zangezur corridor. Critics accuse the Prime Minister of weakening democracy, undermining judicial independence, silencing dissent, and aligning the country's governance with the authoritarian models of Baku and Ankara. The Armenian Revolutionary Federation Eastern Region Central Committee has issued a forceful statement, vehemently condemning the Pashinyan regime for its systematic persecution of Armenia's last remaining national institutions, the Armenian Apostolic Church and the ARF itself. According to the statement, the recent arrests of clergy on fabricated terrorism charges, followed by politically motivated raids on the homes and offices of ARF members, mark a dangerous new chapter in Armenia's accelerating descent into authoritarian rule. These are not isolated abuses of power. They are calculated moves in a broader campaign to silence dissent and dismantle the institutional foundation of Armenian identity. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, having already presided over the catastrophic capitulation of Artsakh and the forced displacement of its population, now turns inward, seeking to crush any voice that speaks with moral clarity or national purpose. The statement condemns Pashinyan's vulgar public campaign to defame His Holiness Catholicos Karekin II, using unsubstantiated personal attacks, obscene insinuations, and calls for his forced removal, is not only a moral affront but a blatant attempt to subjugate the Church to state control. The Armenian Apostolic Church, a sacred institution that has preserved our people's faith and identity for over 1,700 years, now finds itself under siege by a regime that fears its enduring moral authority. Similarly, the ARF, a movement born of resistance and dedicated to the liberation and preservation of the Armenian nation, is being targeted not for any crime, but for its steadfast refusal to bow to tyranny. The Armenian Revolutionary Federation, with a century-old presence in the eastern United States, stands in full solidarity with our compatriots in Armenia. From Boston to Philadelphia, from New York to Providence, our communities recognize this moment for what it is, a struggle for the survival of the Armenian nation and the defense of its most sacred institutions. The Eastern Region Central Committee rejects the regime's politics of intimidation and betrayal, and we reaffirm our unwavering commitment to the Armenian Church, the Armenian homeland, and the unbreakable bond between them. Since taking office, Pashinyan has dismantled democratic norms, weaponized state institutions, and governed through fear and coercion. All the while, he has pursued a foreign policy of capitulation, appeasing Turkey and Azerbaijan at the expense of Armenian sovereignty, dignity, and security. Finally, the statement calls upon the Armenian people, both in Armenia and across the diaspora, to reject this regime of cowardice and betrayal, declaring firmly, "The ARF stands resolute. We will not yield. We will not be silenced." During the feast of the founding of Holy Etchmiadzin, Catholicos of all Armenians, His Holiness Karakin II, condemned what he called a state-led campaign to marginalize the Armenian Apostolic Church, warning, "There is no Armenian identity without Etchmiadzin," and that undermining the Church is a direct threat to national unity and statehood. His remarks are widely seen as a rebuke of government policies under Prime Minister Pashinyan that aim to erode national institutions. Detained philanthropist Samvel Karapetyan released a statement through his lawyers suggesting political motivations behind his arrest. He pointed to Azerbaijani pressure as a likely cause and noted the symbolic timing of his detention, exactly 4 years after an international warrant was issued. Meanwhile, his son called on the Armenian diaspora to unite in defense of political prisoners and to resist domestic repression. European ambassadors in Armenia have demanded urgent explanations amid a new wave of repression, including the detention of Karapetyan and mass arrests coinciding with the Prime Minister's visit to Turkey. They warned that these actions reflect openly anti-democratic steps. In response, Armenian authorities pushed a fabricated narrative accusing the Church, Karapetyan, and former President Serge Sargsyan and Robert Kocharyan of plotting a coup, alleging they prevented an attempted government overthrow. Amid rising tensions in Armenia over the government's actions targeting the Armenian Apostolic Church, starkly different responses have emerged from two major powers, Russia and France. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov called the situation surrounding the Church Armenia's internal affair, emphasizing that Moscow does not wish to interfere. In an interview, Peskov acknowledged the concern among the large Armenian diaspora in Russia, saying many disapprove of how events are unfolding. Nevertheless, he reaffirmed that the Kremlin views the matter as a strictly domestic issue and will continue to monitor it without intervention. In sharp contrast, French President Emmanuel Macron has publicly thrown his support behind the Armenian Prime Minister. Following a phone call with Pashinyan, Macron posted a message in Armenian declaring France's solidarity with the Armenian government against what he described as attempts to destabilize Armenia's democracy. Macron's endorsement comes despite growing criticism of Pashinyan for politically motivated arrests, crackdowns on the Armenian Apostolic Church, and the repression of dissent, actions widely seen as undermining democratic norms. Even amid his own declining popularity and domestic controversies in France, Macron has remained a steady supporter of Pashinyan, backing the Armenian government as it faces mounting allegations of authoritarianism and repression. The ARF Western Europe strongly criticized President Macron's support for Pashinyan, calling it unacceptable and incomprehensible. In a statement, the ARF questioned how Macron could back a leader who surrendered Artsakh, ceded land to Azerbaijan, and led Armenia into military and moral decline. The ARF also condemned Macron's silence on Pashinyan's attacks on the Armenian Church and its Catholicos, asking if he tolerates similar attacks on the Pope. The statement further challenged Macron's comments on democracy in Armenia, accusing him of ignoring the Pashinyan regime's crackdown on clergy, opposition leaders, and activists. On foreign policy, the ARF slammed Macron's praise for peace efforts with Turkey and Azerbaijan, calling them one-sided amid ongoing threats and denialist rhetoric from Baku and Ankara. Armenia's foreign ministry has expressed strong disappointment over the Istanbul Declaration and accompanying resolutions adopted at the latest ministerial conference of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, describing the language used in the documents as distorted, biased, and extremely one-sided. The declaration, backed by Azerbaijan, accuses Armenia of undermining Azerbaijan's sovereignty and calls for the return of displaced Azerbaijanis. Armenia rejected these claims, stating that Azerbaijanis left Soviet Armenia voluntarily and were compensated, unlike Armenians who were violently expelled from cities like Baku and Sumgait and later from Nagorno-Karabakh during the 2023 ethnic cleansing. The ministry also condemned references to Western Azerbaijan as a veiled territorial claim against Armenia and urged OIC member states to abandon resolutions that undermine Armenia's sovereignty and regional peace efforts. Azerbaijan swiftly fired back. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ayhan Hajizadeh accused Armenia of deliberately distorting the content of the declaration and falsifying historical facts, framing it as another attempt by Yerevan to derail the ongoing peace process between the two nations. The Armenian National Committee International issued a strong condemnation of the recent Istanbul Declaration and related resolutions adopted by the Council of Foreign Ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, calling the sections concerning Armenia and the region misleading and deeply concerning, accusing the OIC of echoing Azerbaijan's propaganda, particularly regarding claims of Western Azerbaijan, forced displacement, and cultural destruction. In a statement, the ANC stated that the declaration misrepresents the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in a one-sided manner and ignores Azerbaijan's own human rights violations, including ethnic cleansing, occupation of Armenian territory, and destruction of Armenian heritage. The Armenian National Committee warned the Azerbaijan's use of the OIC to inflame inter-religious tensions threatens peaceful coexistence in the region and called on Islamic nations to reject such efforts and uphold principles of justice, tolerance, and international law. A nationwide poll by the ARF Foundation reveals deep public skepticism in Armenia over peace with Azerbaijan and growing dissatisfaction with domestic governance. 68.5% of respondents said lasting peace with Baku is unlikely through negotiations, and 62.8% believe a treaty is impossible without resolving the Artsakh issue. An overwhelming 87.5% view the loss of Artsakh as temporary and support military strengthening. While army and church enjoy high public trust, confidence in the National Assembly and government is low. A majority, 67.8%, disapprove of the government's handling of internal affairs, while only 25.4% express satisfaction. Similarly, 58.9% of respondents believe Armenia's foreign policy is heading in the wrong direction, with just 31.5% supporting the current approach. Conducted between May 8 and June 5, 2025, the poll surveyed 1,071 participants. A new nationwide poll by the Gallup International Association's Armenia office reveals that 53.7% of Armenians believe there are sufficient grounds to launch impeachment proceedings against Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. Conducted between June 23 to 25 with 1,000 respondents, the survey also shows growing public dissatisfaction, with 67.9% rating his performance negatively, 49.1% calling it extremely negative, and 18.8% somewhat negative. The findings mark a sharp decline in public confidence since February 2025 and come amid mounting political pressure as opposition forces in parliament pursue a vote of no confidence. Media reports from the Istanbul Armenian community reveal surprising details about the recent meeting between Armenian Prime Minister and Turkish President. According to a source close to Erdogan's inner circle, the Turkish leadership was stunned by Pashinyan's approach. Instead of defending Armenian interests or seeking further dialogue, Pashinyan reportedly agreed unconditionally and even proposed initiatives himself. Among these were offers to remove Mount Ararat from Armenia's coat of arms, a dismissal of the Armenian genocide recognition as a settled issue, and an assertion that the withdrawal of Russian military bases from Armenia is inevitable. The Turkish side was reportedly shocked, saying they never imagined such a stance. French Ambassador Anne Boulon's June 21 visit to Shushi has sparked strong backlash from Armenian and international observers who accuse her of endorsing Azerbaijan's narrative that whitewashes centuries of Armenian presence. By calling Shushi one of the most important cultural places in Azerbaijan and praising ongoing restoration efforts, Boulon failed to acknowledge the forced displacement of indigenous Armenians and the systematic destruction of their cultural heritage. Her remarks, void of any acknowledgement of the Armenian past, mark a disturbing shift in French diplomacy, one that appears to legitimize Baku's revisionist agenda and deepen the erasure of Armenian identity in Artsakh. Stepanakert, the capital of occupied Artsakh, is set to host the 17th Economic Cooperation Organization ECO Summit on July 3 to 4, according to Turkish Ambassador to Azerbaijan Birol Akun, who characterized the summit as a sign of growing international diplomacy and a testament to the deepening strategic alliance between Turkey and Azerbaijan. However, the announcement has sparked renewed alarm over Azerbaijan's ongoing efforts to erase the Armenian cultural and historical presence in Stepanakert. Observers and human rights groups have raised concerns about the systematic destruction of Armenian monuments, cultural landmarks, and key institutions in the occupied region, warning that these actions threaten to wipe out centuries of Armenian heritage from Artsakh. As Armenia signals readiness for peace, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has intensified accusations against Yerevan, labeling Armenia a war criminal state and accusing it of targeting Azerbaijani cities and energy infrastructure during the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. At the same time, Baku is facing growing international condemnation over its crackdown on press freedom. Several journalists and peace activists have received harsh prison sentences on what human rights groups call politically motivated charges, many tied to their exposure of corruption linked to Aliyev's inner circle. The European Union's diplomatic service called the verdicts a worrying development, urging Azerbaijan to uphold human rights and ensure a safe environment for journalists. The EU remains committed to continuing dialogue and cooperation on human rights with Azerbaijan, the statement added. Amnesty International described the prosecutions as a weaponization of Azerbaijan's judicial system to silence independent journalism and demanded the immediate release of all detained media workers. With at least 25 journalists currently imprisoned, watchdogs warn of deepening authoritarianism in Azerbaijan, raising serious concerns about the country's democratic trajectory and its impact on fragile regional peace efforts. Tensions between Iran and Azerbaijan are escalating amid growing disputes over regional sovereignty and security concerns. In a pointed diplomatic move, Iran's ambassador to Armenia, Mehdi Sobhani, firmly rejected Azerbaijan's use of the term Western Azerbaijan to describe parts of Armenia, emphasizing that the term refers solely to a province within Iran. He warned that applying the name to Armenian territory implies an unacceptable territorial claim and violates Armenia's sovereignty. Sobhani went further, reiterating Iran's firm support for Armenia's territorial integrity and voiced Tehran's opposition to any proposed Azerbaijani corridor crossing Armenian land, calling it a provocative and unacceptable move. Separately, Sobhani confirmed that Tehran has asked Baku to investigate reports of Israeli drones entering Iranian airspace via Azerbaijan. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian raised the issue in a phone call directly with President Aliyev, who rejected the allegations and insisted Azerbaijan maintains full control over its airspace. The exchange follows Israeli media reports suggesting drone activity from an unnamed country close to Iran, renewing Tehran's concerns about Baku's ties with Israel. Baku, however, has responded sharply. Azerbaijan's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ayhan Hajizadeh accused Ambassador Sobhani of distorting the resolutions adopted by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, regarding the so-called Western Azerbaijan community. He insisted the resolutions only support the right of return for Azerbaijanis, not any form of territorial claim. Calling Ambassador Sobhani's comments provocative and inconsistent with Iran's position at the recent OIC summit in Istanbul, Baku warned that such remarks could risk harming Iran-Azerbaijan relations. Amid escalating tensions between Moscow and Baku, triggered by the killing of 2 Azerbaijanis by Russian security forces in Yekaterinburg, Azerbaijan's Ministry of Culture has announced the suspension of all Russian cultural events within the country, citing what it called systematic violence targeting Azerbaijani nationals in Russia. This comes just days after Iran openly condemned Azerbaijan's regional policies, signaling an increasingly isolated position for Baku on the international stage. In local news, Swiss parliamentarians Eric Vontobel and Lucas Reimann, joined by former Armenian Foreign Minister Vartan Oskanyan and Christian Solidarity International President Dr. John Eibner will hold a Capitol Hill briefing on July 8th to present the Swiss Peace Initiative for Nagorno-Karabakh. The initiative, backed by the Swiss Federal Assembly, aims to create a neutral platform for dialogue between Azerbaijan and displaced Artsakh Armenians to support their safe and dignified return. The Armenian National Committee of America welcomed the event, calling it a key step in advancing international efforts for Artsakh's right of return. June 27 marked the 32nd anniversary of the liberation of Martakert during the Artsakh War. Following a successful operation in Karabakh, Armenian forces captured key positions in late June 1993, repelled Azerbaijani attacks, and secured the city by June 28. The operation was a major turning point, strengthening Armenian defenses and control in the region. In sports, Armenian football legend Hairenik Mkhitaryan announced that he will end his career at Inter Milan, rejecting potential moves to Armenia or Saudi Arabia. Emphasizing love for the game over money, Mkhitaryan cited his desire to retire on a high note. Now 36, he remains a pivotal player at Inter, recently helping secure the Series A title. That's all for tonight's broadcast. Thank you for joining, and don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X. Good night.